Right now, the Mubarak presidency is in its death throes, and there is a very real possibility that Iran will be able to capitalize on the situation, and Islamic fundamentalism will be able to gain a foothold in one of America's strongest allies in the region for over 30 years. But it didn't have to be that way. The problem with having your president up for election every 4 years here in America is that presidents tend to view the world in the same regard and build foreign policy around their own election. We tend to have foreign policy based on reaction rather than acting proactively. This is nothing new for the U.S. We backed Saddam Hussein in Iraq because he acted as a counterweight to Iranian influence, and we were forced later to deal with his own expansionism. We backed the Shah for too long, and Iran flipped into an Islamic country. Heck, we backed England in 1787 against France's pro-democracy movement, and it fermented the rise of Napoleon. There really isn't anything we can do about the current Egypt crisis, nor should we. If we support Mubarak and claim the protesters are Islamic puppets, we will look like we are supporting a tyrant and not protecting free speech or democracy. If we come out and support the protesters, we look like we are turning our back on one of our most trusted allies. The Iranians played this one beautifully, because they take the long view of things, unlike the United States. For years they had worked with anti-Mubarak forces in Egypt and developed trusted relationships with their leaders. When the time came, they were properly positioned for change and could leverage it to their own advantage. We had a chance for real change in 2005 when Mubarak won his last election by questionable means and declared himself winner and threw his opponent, Ayman Noor, in jail. We didn't pressure the government for a fair election because we were embroiled in a war with Iraq, and Mubarak was seen as an ally, even though we knew him to be a dictator. And like all dictators, he was corrupted by the power of the office and was destined for a fall. Now, Egypt may be unrecoverable as an ally in the Mideast. The U.S. needs to evolve in its foreign policy considerations from a reactive stance to a proactive stance. It needs to foster democracy in any form, regardless of the immediate strategic concerns, in order to develop long-term relationships and maintain freedom in the world. The United States must stand for freedom and democracy, regardless of its immediate outcome, because in the long term the world will be better for it. Our intelligence operatives must act proactively during periods of elections to make sure they are done in an open and ethical manner, and our enemies don't tamper with those elections in order to put in their own hostile governments. We must stand for liberty, freedom, and individual rights. If America is nothing else, it is the only nation in human history that has based its government on the rights of citizens rather than on the strength of government. It is for this reason that going forward we must not prop up the power of tyrants for our own strategic needs. The United States must forgo for the immediate gain for the larger and longer-lasting picture of the world. America must take the long view of things. This is the primary reason why so many hate the United States. We say one thing, but we do another for our own needs. We talk a big game and then turn our backs when freedom needs us most. We are seen as hypocrites in a world that needs, above all else, truth. When America claims its own superiority because of its tenets, of its Constitution, standing for freedom and individualism, and rightly so, but then funds and supports dictators against the will of their own people, how can anyone see it otherwise? It is not that we must now turn our back on Mubarak. I am saying we must now, as allies who are Mubaraks of the future, relook at that relationship. America must develop relationships with the rising needs of people worldwide so that when democracy does come to a nation, it is not perverted and tainted with the stench of puppetry from our enemies. The United States must look at the world in terms of 50 or 100 years rather than 4. If our enemies install a puppet government, then the world will see it for what it is and stand with us against that government. But they won't unless we stop supporting dictators and wrap them in the clothes of our freedom. Our strategic needs must stand second to our defense of liberty and freedom. It is entirely possible that in the short term it may cost lives or damage our immediate interests. However, in the long run, a free world living in the light of honest governments is of far greater value to the United States, both strategically and morally. The politics of expediency must never take a back seat to the concepts of freedom and democracy. If we do, we will be lumped in with the dictators of the world and perish with them in the fires of historical destiny.